Hi, I'm Deon St.Mor, and this is Uncommon.
Uncommon is a production by Neural, an agency that helps both brands and talent tell their story. To learn more, just visit neural.com. That's NEURALLE.com. My guest this week, Deon St.Mor, founder of More Cosmetics, St.Mor Group Advisory, and Drumplings. Thanks for coming in. We were just chatting in the kitchen earlier about putting out fires. I was curious, have you ever considered joining the fire department after that little escapade?
Yeah, look, I'm an Aries.
Okay.
As a star sign. So I'm a fire sign. So when, fire signs, they like pushing the boundaries.
Okay.
Like really pushing the boundaries. And for some reason I love water. And being a fire sign, it's that thing, it's probably a resistance thing. I can imagine it's a resistance thing, let's get a little bit, energetic here in terms of, uncommon conversation. But when you're a fire sign, I can imagine you probably resist, things that you would may get in your way. So water for me probably is one of those things. So I probably want to, try and temper it or try and curate it or, try and wield its energy.
Interesting.
Which is, probably a philosophy that comes into, my mindset as well, because I'm quite unconventional and, probably flowing a little bit like water, I guess.
Yeah. Do you...
Good question, though.
I was thinking...
How we got to that point.
I was thinking how far up was your apartment to that fire?
So I'm 3 levels up.
Wow.
So, yeah, look, to answer your question have I ever wanted to be a firefighter? No. But I think a combination of, growing up in the country and having an analytical mindset. So my mind's just constantly, working. It doesn't sort of stop in that sense. So when you have a mind that's constantly processing, if something happens, I'm very, very reactional and very quick on my feet. So whatever that is, it's been thousands of scenarios, whether I've been in Rio or, on top of, the ski hill, you sort of train your mind to be aware of things. And that leads on to a really crucial area of, I think, me as a person. When you study something like a design discipline, if you're exceptional at what you do, you will take in everything constantly. So I'm constantly taking things in, even walking into your apartment now and into the studio. I've already seen how things are placed, your bar, the bookshelf over here. I've already noted all the books on it. I've seen the bottles up the top here of the great wines you've drunk. So for me, I just see everything and you take it in. So those things, when they're coupled, when you're seeing everything and being quite reactional, then you're sort of quick on your feet.
Yeah, it's very A-type behaviour.
Yeah, correct.
Which I have too.
Okay.
But A-type behaviour, people think it's better or worse. It's definitely a double-edged sword because it can make you, like for me, like almost obsessive with things like work, as an example.
Yep. And you just took the next paragraph straight out of my mouth, and that's correct. It's a double-edged sword. So I'm constant, and then that means you just don't have downtime. But when I do have downtime, I will sit on the couch and I just put the television on, and I don't care what's on in the background. Yeah. And then it's what we were talking about earlier on, that it's either white noise. My white noise, I do like peace and quiet, but then it'll just be the television on in the background.
Okay.
And whatever it is, it'll be a cooking show or, I don't put reality television shows on. Don't go that far. The Kardashians or, something crazy like that.
So cooking shows is like your go-to?
Yeah, cooking shows is my go-to, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you must have loved like the heyday of... Remember when MasterChef came out?
Yes.
That was I got to say, that must have been the pinnacle of cooking and food in Australia in the last 20 years.
Yeah, definitely.
Like it elevated it to another level.
Yeah. And I think it opened up people's interest in cooking too.
Yeah.
Which Australia's always been second nature to to I think home cooking, because we think, unfortunately, people think of us as two steak and veg nation, which we are, but then you start looking at obviously Europe and all of those beautiful countries, and they just have such abundance of incredible cooking.
Yeah.
But now at least you're right, those sorts of shows have opened up people, and at least has given them the confidence to try those things, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what it made me realize is how the impact of different groups of people, like having a Greek Mediterranean background, let's say, it made me realize how many different things impacted Australian cuisine and how unique it was. Like, in America, let's say 10, 15 years ago, you wouldn't assume that most people would have olive oil in their kitchen. But a lot of people, even 10, 15 years ago in Australia, had olive oil in their kitchen.
Yeah.
Like quite a lot of people.
Yep.
A lot of friends who had predominantly Australian backgrounds, Asian backgrounds, they had it because it was in the supermarket because people bought it. So there's all these little kooky things that I noticed watching those shows and how it impacted us as a cooking culture. And then obviously, MasterChef elevated it and made celebrities out of people.
Yeah.
That's probably what it was, is the celebrity factor.
Yes.
Now, speaking of you and your personality and let's say growing up, what's sort of your earliest memory of life?
Look, I grew up in far north Queensland, so I'm way up north. Cairns, Mareeba, Port Douglas. So, those sorts of areas. And looking back, growing up in a small, Mareeba was a very industry-based region, so tobacco was the big area up there.
Okay. I would have assumed like sugarcane.
Sugarcane as you get down to the coast.
Okay.
So into Mossman and Port Douglas. So my mother's side was down in Mossman and Port Douglas. My father's side was up in Mareeba. And funnily enough, those two things, are my probably my earliest sort of memories of growing up north. Especially something, like I can vividly remember walking into a tobacco kiln.
Wow.
And there's these massive leaves. They're the size of, two bodies, these leaves, and they just get hung up and, they just get air dried, and you walk in and there's just this incredible aroma. So things like that, I remember stuff like that.
That's scent.
Yeah, that's scent.
Yeah.
So, that is, that's quite interesting that you pick up on that, because that obviously leads further on into my life, and then
in the cosmetic space,
and then that takes me to my cosmetics sort of area. So,
well, I can see how things like Tom Ford would inspire you, because like things like tobacco and sugarcane and all that is like a big feature of his scent, so to speak.
Yes,
that they are nice masculine scents, if that makes sense.
Yep.
But yeah, the reason I pick up on the scent thing is mainly because for me growing up, it was my dad's factory.
Okay.
Printer.
Right.
And so there was really two smells you had. It was either fresh paper, which was very strong.
Yes.
Or like warm paper, or the smell of ink.
Yeah, wow.
Which is, one is really warm and one is cold. I don't know how else to explain that, but one was a cold scent. So it wasn't strong in the air, but when you smelt it in proximity, it was very strong. And then the smell of paper was sort of just everywhere all the time.
I like that.
Yeah.
And it was machinery and also machinery, I'd imagine, was another part.
Yeah, like bits of oil and stuff like that. But it wasn't as strong as the smell of like packaging and cardboard and paper and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
Rubber bands.
Yeah.
I just remember sitting on this I distinctly remember years and years of work, like sitting on one of those high-rise desks where you're basically just working with some other casual, and because he just put me on as a casual, right?
Yeah, yeah.
When I was like 14 or 15.
Good one, Dad.
And and he paid me less than them as well. That was the best thing about it. He probably wouldn't get away with that shit nowadays. But yeah, like just sitting there, packing up all sorts of projects, like wrapping in rubber bands and in boxes and all sorts of bindery work, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
That was my distinct memory. But it's interesting how those things like affect you later on in life.
Yeah, I think so.
You get nostalgia for it.
Yeah, but if you're aware of it, you hope that you can retrace those memories, and then you understand why or where you're at, and that plays in many aspects of your life psychologically. I think, whether you've had trauma, whether you've had great things in life that happened as a kid, whether you are surrounded by things like ink and those smells, they form for you now. If you maybe stop and really dug deep, that it's probably carved something for you. And what sort of significance that has, then you have to sort of layer that, into your current self, I guess.
Yeah, well, the significance for me, at least, is that idea of media, paper, printing, stories was always an element. And so having a Greek dad and Aussie mum, Dad was always down my throat about doing a profession, so accounting, lawyer, et cetera, doctor, whatever it may be. Did that at uni, hated it, and then gradually went I went into financial services, then I did marketing and sales in financial services, and then gradually got into the agency or more creative space, which my family's always been in.
Yes.
So it makes me wonder, parents will tell you don't do this thing or do this thing, and the reality is sometimes it's almost defined for you based on the things that you liked as a kid or your personality trait, etc.
Yes.
So I guess I was intrigued from your perspective. I mean, when you got into the whole more cosmetics business, it must have been quite an obvious story for yourself because you've got these smells, these ideas that come from your background. It may not have lined up at that point in time, but do you think in hindsight it was sort of a no-brainer?
Yeah, no, it is. Definitely is.
Yeah.
It definitely has a lineage along the way that, those connect the dots sort of scenario. But going back to your original question as well, I think when you're a creative, I think that's some of my earliest, sort of memories as well. I was one of those kids that pulled everything apart no matter what. So if I was given, a Tonka truck,
okay,
I would have pulled that thing apart.
Yeah.
I pulled off the little thing that bloody, kept the wheel on. I wanted to know, how it was put, how it worked, whatever it was. And there was a million one things, that I was given, games and all sorts of stuff. And I would pull them apart and then I would want to put them all back together. So again, that goes back to that analytical mindset of, how do things work? Why do they work? Why are they this way, and why have they been pieced that way? And ultimately, as a designer or as a great, and obviously when we get to that, but obviously I studied industrial design, but when you are of that caliber, then you want a better product constantly. So for me, going back to your original question, I pulled things apart because I was curious why they were great, why they weren't great, how they could be better, and how I can improve, that, let's just say Tonka truck as an example, but, whatever. But
were either of your parents like that at all?
No.
Okay.
No, they weren't.
Was there any lessons you picked up from them along the way from a principled point of view?
My father is quite... he's typical Italian, old school, he just thinks that way, old school in his mentality. Get a good job, probably similar to yours, be stable and do all of that sort of stuff. And I didn't take any of his advice. But my mother is a little bit more, she's the one who's, if anything, nurtured me to be open-minded and have a open mindset when it comes to life and, all of those sorts of things. So she allowed me to be smart enough and open enough when I'm dealing with things rather than saying, don't do that, don't touch that, or why are you doing that?
Yeah.
She sort of would let me do it. So those sorts of things gave me those foundations early on. So when they're coupled with my curious mind, my not wanting to understand how things worked, then a parental figure that allowed you to do that, then, that they all build into something as you grow, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting, isn't it?
It's very interesting. I mean, my parents are very similar to that regard. So I know you studied Bachelor of Fine Arts, Bachelor of Arts, so finishing up at RMIT in 93.
Yep.
Straight out the gate, you found your own award-winning multidisciplinary design firm. That was DDT Design.
Yep.
So this to me seemed like more of a graphic design business, and then D1 Design was more of a industrial design business. Am I wrong in that?
Yeah. Look, I think it was quite interesting because when I came out of university, I teamed up with two mates of mine, and one was a fashion. I think it's fashion merchandising.
Visual merchandising.
Fashion merchandising. So they study more the fashion side of merchandising and how it all sort of sits and all that sort of stuff. And then another industrial designer. So we pretty much did. We came out of university and we started this thing. But as you know, when you come out of university to get your first gigs, it's a tough run. So we just did everything. We did graphic design, we did product design, we did commercial interiors, we did some residential interiors. We picked up a job down in Port Melbourne, I remember. We fitted out a whole office building. Here I am, no idea about, fitting out office buildings, but whatever we could get our hands on, we got our hands on.
Yeah.
So I guess that's why it's sort of, it was a multidisciplinary design practice. And back then, there was the North Melbourne Council, and I don't know, I can't remember what the council was, whatever it is up there, but, they threw millions of dollars into, building creative hubs.
Right.
And somehow we got our hands on, got our hands on this gig, and we became part of this new build. And, they wanted to build in, fashion design and product design and all of this stuff. So, it was probably early days of, sort of incubators, I guess. And, that was a big one for us as well. So those sorts of things, I guess built that business, yeah.
It's always interesting to see people who go, because we've had other people who run agencies that just like straight out the gate of uni, they just go into founding their own business.
Yep.
And was it as simple as just the fact that, it was too tough to get a job? And so you're like, fuck it, we'll just do it on our own? No,
I think looking at it now, it definitely goes back to my personality type. I didn't want to fall into the gates of, being part of all of that. I think I figured that out pretty quickly. While I was at uni, I was just one of those characters that was constantly pushing the boundaries as well. I was head of, all the functions and all the, all the cool gigs that we'd always organise and all of that sort of stuff. And so, when you're sort of pushing things constantly, yeah, I think that's...
You'd clash with authority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that's probably quite a good one. I was constantly in the dean's office, but interestingly enough, I was in the dean's office, and then I convinced them to employ me while I was at university to do work. So, things like that. Here I was, a 20-year-old convincing the dean of, architecture. And she was, what was her name now? She was a very famous woman. And I'd have to think about it. But, here I was, a uni student, going to, the dean's, house for dinner and doing all these crazy things at a young age,
Yeah.
Things that I forget about now. But again, that was me just pushing the boundaries and see how far I could get away with stuff.
Yeah, and sometimes when you're an employee, it is very hard to do that stuff. And I found that for the first sort of 4 to 5 years of my working career, and that it just didn't align with my personality. I'd get in more trouble than anything.
Yeah, okay.
So, yeah, it took me a while to accept that sometimes you just don't have personality traits that gel with working for other people.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
Yeah, that's the other thing
different.
too.
Everyone's different. It just means that you've got probably a harder path initially in the offset. So,
but it's good that you worked that out, because I think a lot of people take a long time to work that out. And it is like anything, isn't it? You've got to go. You either fall into that sort of situation and then you work it out, or you jump and either early on or have the confidence to take that jump. And when you do, you think, why the hell didn't I do this sooner?
Yeah, I guess my problem is that I would get too passionate about decisions that were outside of my control.
Right.
When I worked for someone else, and so I'd care too much, and so I'd get into arguments. About it, where it's like it's not really my business.
Yeah.
Literally not really my business.
Yeah,
like,
but good attribute though.
It is, but it also gets you into trouble. That's the thing.
Yeah.
So I guess I was curious, you had these two design businesses. It was obvious in one of the interviews you mentioned how More was sort of born out of this homewares brand D1 that was producing homewares, and you realized there was a place for More because essentially you discovered recurring revenue, essentially, as opposed to a one-off sale. But I was curious, like, why go from the business of essentially an expert to a product business per se? What was the initial draw there? Were you bored of dealing with clients and disagreeing with their opinions? Because that is a commonality amongst creatives that and there's a lot of creatives that we interview, and then eventually go and found their own businesses because they're fed up with people not taking their advice. So I was curious: is there something like that? Was there something like that there? Or is it just the opportunity?
I think it was the opportunity.
Yeah.
It was the opportunity. I understand that side of thing as well. Side of things as well. Dealing with clients and all of that sort of thing, which I had to do early on. So now that I think about that, and you raise that, it's a good point. Like I remember doing we did an interior for a very, very, very wealthy Malaysian family, and she was royalty, and they had an apartment in the Rockmans Regency, and they just said, "Here's $250,000, go and fit out our apartment." It's like, what the hell? But we would do it, and then there's obviously the clashes because
right, yeah,
so I get your point. But going back to your question, being an industrial designer, obviously I build product, create product that is, it's beautiful to look at, but then it's consumable. So ultimately, once I got through D1, which was a homewares brand, but it was a beautiful, if I ever had to do a like for like with the homewares brand, it would be like it was a bit of a Alessi sort of style homewares brand. We did really beautiful product, but then that translation into More was really starting to understand the homewares, which when you create a lamp, for example, and you build this beautiful lamp, sure, you might be selling at $500, but you don't come back in 6 weeks' time and buy another lamp.
Yeah.
So then we just started adding in basic product into our collections of, sort of body care and soaps and, things, candles and stuff like that. And then those things, repetitively, they had a repeat. And, it's that consumable sort of scenario. So that's when the penny dropped.
Yeah, that's when you go from like $1 million business to a multi-million-dollar business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And very quickly.
Yeah, very quickly.
Very, very quickly. If you've got good product and good design, and, that all falls back to the industrial design philosophy, and you can keep up with production, then that's when, you're right, that's when it becomes repeatable.
When you think about product, what were the sort of golden principles you pulled from that time? Like there's 20 years in that business, thereabouts. What were the sort of golden principles that you pulled into Drumplings today?
I think golden principles through More was it's really packaging design.
Okay.
Packaging design is really what it's about. For More in its heyday, it was definitely packaging design. So
really?
Through that period, early days, you'd remember like Aesop had just started out, and then there were all of these other sort of brands that were very similar, but very clean. It's typeset on white, or whatever. It's just it's that typeset thing, right?
Yeah.
Which 1,000 brands have done. Yeah. And they've all been successful. But then all of a sudden I saw this window and I just went, well, why isn't anybody, being ridiculously ornate and over-designing packaging for the cosmetic world? And that's when, again, that sort of that scenario sort of popped, and we built beautiful packaged product. So that really was the key. And the second thing was our fragrances. So we were, our fragrances were incredible for their times as well. Back then no one was pushing the boundaries with fragrance, and sort of early, sort of mid-90s, or when did more early 2000s. Nobody was really pushing the boundaries for that. So then, we started really pushing the boundaries. So really it was coupled with those two.
So the business originally founded with a young lady who you took on a date.
Yep.
Really sort of established from that.
Yes.
And I mean, it was interesting to go through the whole journey and look at things. I mean, recently you took an exit from the business, and I guess we were intrigued around that. I mean, 2 decades in it, I guess I was curious, why sell? Why not just have someone else run it? Was it as simple as you'd had your time and it was time to move on and do something else? Or what was the thought process there?
Yeah, look, it was 15 years, and there's many factors. I got to open up, offices around the world. I was in the US office, every month. I was in the UK office. I was visiting distributors in and out of the country for years and years and years. There wasn't a month that I wasn't on a plane somewhere. Every month I was out of the country. Yeah, so right. Stuff like that.
Adds up.
It adds up. And also I think we really pushed the boundaries for a long time. At least for a good 10 to 12 years, we really pushed it hard. And then there was all the competitors. Then they all of a sudden worked it out, and they all latched on. So, and that doesn't mean you can't keep innovating, but
it gets harder.
I just felt as though that, my time, it was my time, I'd done it for a good, like I said, 15 years, pushed the boundaries hard, travelled, lived, done all of the things, but it was sort of time to do something new.
Yeah.
It really was time to do something new. And that's part of my nature as well. I probably get, you'll understand that you get bored quite easily when you're doing stuff like that. And,
yeah.
I was, and then look, to be brutally honest, I was going to the office at 11 o'clock in the morning, and I'd be in there for 30 minutes, and I'd be like, well, I've got nothing to do. It actually got to that point.
Yeah.
Like you got 100 plus staff, whatever, and they're all doing their things, and there's a massive warehouse with another, 50 staff in it, and I just didn't have anything to do. So then I'd probably lost a bit of the challenge too. So, it became, Groundhog Day, and, I didn't have anything to do. Whereas now I'm hands-on with, what I'm doing again. So that's, I love that. I love that I'm in there, learning about production, food, and all the things that I had no idea about, and I still don't have any idea about, but I'm learning constantly. Yeah. So again, it's that. So look, it's a few things, but, probably ultimately I probably got bored.
Do you, because that's something I would have in my own personality, I guess. Is there sort of cues for that you look for now to prevent yourself getting bored with the project? Like I've got a sense that doing this project, Uncommon, I could do it for the rest of my life because of the type of people that come in the room. But I also do worry, like, could I get bored of the format, so to speak?
Yeah.
Is there any guidance you'd have for someone like myself?
That's a very good question. when you are that A personality type, you constantly need to be, your mind needs to be constantly,
Stimulated.
Yeah, thank you. That's the word I was looking for. And there is a massive danger in it. There's a massive danger in it, and there's all the things that come with that, complacency, and so you've just got to be. I think you've got to be highly aware, but then it also depends on your sort of comfort, values as well. Some people like being comfortable, so then they're happy being on that sort of that level. But if you're constantly pushing the boundaries, well then, there's a danger in it too, because you're always living on that edge, which I tend to do a little bit as well. I'm living on the edge a little bit at the moment, really throwing everything at Drumplings, and I believe in it, but I'm living on the edge again because it's a pretty much a startup.
Yeah.
So so it keeps me alive and keeps me stressed and all of those things, which I didn't have for a long time. So
okay. Yeah. So the lack of stress maybe is a good indicator.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So I don't know whether they answered your question. Then I'm not really sure, but
I think I got it. I think stress is like the lead indicator. If you don't feel stressed about something, then you should be worried.
Yeah, probably.
So Drumplings, world's first fusion dumplings brand, and I guess your first foray into the space. We've got flavours like cheeseburger, mac and cheese seems to be like the number one flavour that everyone talks about, beef rendang, truffle mushroom, butter chicken. You came up with this idea, drinking with mates.
Yep.
You were wondering why no one had mixed this idea of Western dishes with dumplings. And to me, initially, the idea sounded like, honestly, a tacky combination, but it's obviously come off and the food is good because I've tasted it. Like, I'd been to Drumplings back in the day when it first launched, and you've obviously got this frozen food or this food distributed business now, which is everything. How did you ensure it didn't just become a trend and it actually became a sustainable business?
Yeah, look, the Drumpling story is quite fascinating. It really is a good story. Number one, I was staggered. Nobody had touched dumplings anywhere on the planet. So everyone's touched Vietnamese, they've touched Chinese, they've touched French. They've all mucked around with it and given it a modern edge, right? But nobody had touched dumplings, and it just fascinated me. But two parts that I found really curious was that, yes, dumplings have been around for 1,000 years, and, there's a handful of them that are super famous, pork and chive, and the list goes on. And then they had never been tampered with. And then the second thing was that there's the old school Chinese restaurants that are still old school. Yeah. You walk in and, the carpet's sticky and dirty and, the walls haven't been touched and painted for 1,000 years, and the Chinese lady just says to you, 2 people, 5, that's all they say, not welcome, but how many people? Yeah. It's always the case. So they're all, it's old school mentality and old school. And then so those two things coupled fascinated me, that nobody had modernised the experience. So the restaurant really was built to prove the concept, and I built the restaurant purely to prove the concept. It was an expensive prove the concept, but it worked. And, we were generating serious cash, within the first sort of 6 months. So I had to prove that concept on a commercial sense before, we sort of jumped into, the other areas that, now that we're in. And then, of course, certain aspects of the world have forced us to pivot, which has been great, but it has been part of the process. So,
certain aspects being COVID.
Yeah, COVID, correct.
Just a pandemic.
But going back to that, I'm still fascinated because every dish on the planet can be built into a dumpling. So we're working on some incredible duck dumplings at the moment, we're looking at plant-based dumplings. Nobody's done an incredible there's just massive opportunity out there. Massive opportunity of a product that we go back to what you spoke about, and it's a product that is repeatable and it's scalable and it's, it can be global.
So
very similar to
pulled elements from the time in More Cosmetics initially from learning about recurring and repeat revenue, and then you've pulled elements from product design as well. You mentioned COVID before, so that would have massively impacted the business, obviously.
Yes.
How has that in particular changed the go-to-market for Drumplings in the last 6 months?
So can I just answer just a really, really important area there as well that you just picked up on is you are right. It's the coupling of my industrial design, sort of training and university, or whatever you want to call that, coupled with, that repetitive and, scalable and product that is consumable, because it is consumable product at the end of the day. And then being able to curiously build that into something new. So let's just say with Drumplings right now, it's a dumpling, but again, coupled with those two things, it's, you technically I'm building a new product. It is a product and people don't sort of see it that way, but it is a new product. Whether I turn around tomorrow and do a crepe Suzette dumpling or a paella dumpling, which is absolutely incredible, you are building that into a product ultimately. So I like that you appreciate that. But going to your question now, it was about the closure of the restaurant, right?
Yeah, and essentially what would have changed in the last 6 months about how you guys go to market? What are your main channels today?
Well, main channels today are purely supermarket now.
Wow.
So we've built, obviously COVID forced us to shut for 7 or 8 months, as you know, in Melbourne and everywhere in the world. Restaurants have just suffered heavily in the hospitality industry.
Melbourne in particular, though, has copped it hard.
Copped it hard, yeah. And for us, then I had to make the decision, do I reopen and then keep throwing money into the business and keep suffering, which you do because, as you know, people just aren't, in the city. So we made that call and then it was a full remodel. It was a full remodel. So we built our factory in Thomastown and we just started producing our own dumplings. Prior to that, we had a third party. So we were third party 3PL with our dumplings, but then we just pulled it all in-house and off we went. But that's also part of my journey with More as well. So with More, as an example, packaging came out of China, came to Australia, came to filling factories and, cosmetic fillers, and then would come back to us. So, it does this whole thing and, you obviously take a massive chunk out of that middle section because you're paying someone else to make the product for you. Whereas now, I'm either getting bags from somewhere and bringing them in, we make it and then we send it out. So there's none of this, there's none of this middle person, sort of scenario. So that's another big lesson that I learnt from More days.
Okay, so you've gone more direct to consumer essentially by bringing more in-house.
More in-house, yeah.
More in-house.
More in-house, yeah. So again, that makes a lot more sense for us to be able to control our destiny as well.
Yeah.
Whereas before, we still were able to do it, and these guys were big, massive contractors. And if you're filling, 100,000, hand creams or whatever, they could scale it easily. But, you're sort of paying them and you're in their destiny. So it's just better that now that we have, our own control.
You. Yes, you. Are you intrigued by this episode? If so, go to our footer on the website, neuralle.com, neuralle.com. We're going to give you an insight each week. It's going to be on business, marketing, or a topic that we covered in the episode. At all, we'd love your support and it would help us in developing the intellect around this series. But without going on too much longer, let's get back into this episode. I think it may be frustrating now in the last 6 to 12 months, but the shutting down of the restaurant will probably be, in hindsight, one of the better things for you. There's also the opportunity in years to come of, you've probably heard about them, like dark kitchens or sort of like Uber or Deliveroo specific kitchens as like a test bed, so to speak, for getting the product out there for people to initially try. But yeah, I think e-commerce and supermarkets is probably like really the future of the business.
Yeah, no, it is. It definitely is. You know, when you have a restaurant, it's great because you've got a physical location, and you know people love that. But it's one location. Yeah, and that's it. So I can't pick that up and drop it into Perth. You can, but you can't pick it up tomorrow and put it in Perth. So people in Perth get to try the product. Yeah. Whereas now, you know, if we're in 100 supermarkets and, you know, the list keeps growing, everyone in those areas, wherever those supermarkets are, gets to try the product and gets to, you know, consume the product. And again, it's fun because the product is fun. And as you said earlier, we build good product now. You know, it's great for kids, it's great for families, you know, all of that sort of stuff. We have heaps of mums that just say, you know, the kids won't, you know, they won't eat, you know what kids are like, they just don't eat stuff. And then all of a sudden you give them a mac and cheese dumpling, they go mental for it. Same with the cheeseburger, you know, the last thing that mum wants to do is take your kid to McDonald's because of all the bad rap that McDonald's gets. But, you know, we have our cheeseburger dumplings and kids love them, but they are made with, you know, exceptional ingredients, you know, not patties that, well, I don't know what McDonald's makes stuff with these days, but you know what I mean.
Well, I've worked on a broiler at Hungry Jack's when I was like 13, 14. I can tell you it's not good. They're frozen cakes of miscellaneous meat.
Yeah,
that you just don't know what's in it. But
yeah, there you go.
That's so funny that you mentioned the kids, because when I think about it, through my cousin's kids, it's funny to see the lengths they will go at certain ages to inject things like vegetables into their diet. Like, you know, they used to buy them like these little veggie cakes or whatever, but the only reason they ate them is because they looked like sort of the shape of a potato or whatever, but it was just full of things like broccoli and beans and all this stuff that they like find bitter or didn't like, and that they were now eating, which is funny. It's just like whatever will get the job done. And you can see that there's a lot of potential there. Obviously, it's quite obvious based on our conversation that you have an obsession with product. Mm-hmm. You know, Jacob and I were doing the notes, and we both noted that you've got this incredible focus on it. And I'd say that comes from being a detail-orientated or A-type individual. So walk us through what your creative process would look like for coming up with a new flavour of dumpling, from A, being the initial thought of it, to B, being having the actual first taste test, you know, for you guys and your team to taste or check out?
That's actually it's a good question, because you'd be surprised and again, this goes back, and this is another area that we haven't covered, which I find fascinating. It's probably one of the, again, don't get me wrong, I love design and I love industrial design and I love product design, but ultimately at the end of the day, it is the psychology of the product. So you look at an iPhone, or you look at a car, that beautiful, you know, Ferrari over there, and that car has an appeal to you because it's been designed exceptionally well, or it has all the bangs and whistles that makes it sexy for you, right? Or your Dyson, which I noticed was hanging up down there as well, which is another great industrial designer, by the way. Yeah. And it's a sexy machine, right? So it's been built and made to look sexy, right? And again, with us, we've built amazing dumplings, like some really incredible ones, and they just haven't been a success. So then it goes into all of this mindset of what people will look at a certain product. So let's just say, I'll use a really good example of something that we're toying with at the moment, and that's a Vegemite and cheese dumpling. Okay. So will it work? Will it not work? But there's the psychology of people's perception of Vegemite. Yeah. And then it goes into this whole thing about people and how they think about Vegemite and how they think about cheese, and then are they curious about it? Why are they curious about it? Why do they want to eat that product? So it becomes quite complex. Like I said, we've done some really amazing dumplings. Like what's I can't even think of it now. It'll come to me in a minute.
You love that, don't you?
Yeah.
Conversation.
What was a dumpling?
Yeah,
and and people just they didn't latch onto it because it just didn't have something that they really connect to.
Yeah.
Whereas, our top sellers, as they're things that people resonate with. So cheeseburger, mac and cheese, butter chicken. So they have this automatic sort of connection with it. So again, if I was to go tomorrow and go into your original question, if we were to build that Vegemite and cheese product, we would go through the process. We'd do many variations of it with different percentages, and then it would be wrapped into a dumpling. It would get steamed, and we would go through the process of taste testing. But again, we look at product now that resonates with the audience as well and connects with the audience, because that's quite important.
Yeah, I think emotional attachment is a key principle that people would talk to behavioral science, maybe around certain products, but I often find that when you chat to people around the success or lack of success of something, it's often to do with how divisive that thing is. I feel like Vegemite and cheese is quite a divisive thing.
Yeah.
If you pulled a line of random people off the street, let's say 10 or 20 of them, I feel like it'd be a 50-50 split of people who love it and hate it. But that is actually a good thing, because the 50% who do love it. Like, I really, really like Vegemite and cheese. Also, like, I don't know if you've noticed,
there you go,
like Vegemite and avocado.
Yes.
That's like a real
I love that
thing.
too,
You
yeah.
actually see it on, they now have it on the Vegemite packet.
Yeah, right.
On the jar, so to speak.
Yeah, right.
But then there's also people who hate Vegemite.
Oh, yeah.
Which is now only a small minority, I'd say.
Yeah, I tend to agree.
So
look, that I find that real, quite curious. And even when to give you an example, when we built the cheeseburger dumpling for the first time, and I didn't know this at the time when we launched, but it was fascinating to see people's reactions when they put the cheeseburger in their mouth for the first time. They put it in their mouth and they went, well, what the hell just happened? I'm not eating a cheeseburger, but I feel like I've just eaten a cheeseburger. And then it takes their sensories all the way back to the last time they had a McDonald's, probably at 2 a.m. And they go, oh, holy wow, that was the last time. So all of this stuff now, coupled with, all of that, that's how we look at product now. We look at all of those aspects when we're building a product, and what, how broad it sort of can be, I guess.
And would that happen before you even make the product, or will you just make sure that it tastes actually good first?
It starts before, yeah.
Okay.
And then we build it so it tastes good, yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, because I could imagine that you could have a million flavours, peanut butter and jelly, you know. I think I saw on that Studio 10 interview, someone mentioned escargot.
Oh, yes.
Like there's a million flavours that you could come up with.
Yep. So it is.
And if you had that,
limitless.
you could just waste all your money on R&D.
Yeah. Yep. But it is a lot of fun. And, like I said, some things, some were a success and some weren't. But it's just because, there just wasn't that connectivity to the I almost say to the masses, people want to have that, it's that emotional response to it, that emotional connectivity. And that goes with any product design, as you know. So you buy something because you love it, because it looks good, and then hopefully it works exceptionally well as well.
How do you pull back from a lot of the product stuff? Because I can imagine someone like yourself, you could get really deep in the weeds of product. And with a business like Drumplings, are there people, are there activities, are there things that are constantly pulling you back to the element of running the business? Because, that's a dichotomy that you'd have regularly between being essentially the manager or the person who's running things and being the person who's largely in charge of product.
No, I don't. No, I think, creatively, you've got to couple those two, as you said, because then you are at the forefront and you're talking to people, and you're getting that, that hopefully an honest reaction. But yeah, I think
it depends on the business you're in. If you're in a product business, I think it is a lot easier. Actually, no, I'll switch that around. I think in a service business, it's a lot easier to get stuck in the weeds, like the business that I'm in, because there's actual delivery for the client on the services side of things, where product businesses, you can't be the only person to deliver the product. There's just, it simply is not possible.
Yeah.
There's delivery for a start. Like, you can't be also making the product, the dumpling, and delivering the dumpling on top of all the other things that get done. But it's easy in a service business, I feel, to get pulled into the weeds. And I'm guilty of that.
Yeah, okay. I see where you're going with that now. Yeah, look, you've got to. I think you've got to cross lots of, I think, disciplines, and that's something that I really enjoy too. Like I said, I'm not to you earlier. I'm not an expert in the hospitality industry, but I'm learning a lot now, and it's just another complex area. So, it just fascinates me to learn all of that now. But again, yes, I'm crossing a lot of areas, and I like to at least have a small percentage of understanding of all of those areas, whether it's supermarkets or how you have to deal with the buyers or whatever the case is, which I'm doing at the moment. And then, you sort of have to let that go. But I think like any business, you've sort of got to be across everything. Unfortunately, when you're the owner or the director or whatever you want to call yourself, you do unfortunately have to be across everything.
Yeah, you've got to understand every single component.
Yeah, that's right.
Otherwise you're stuffed.
Yeah.
So before we get into rapid fire questions to finish things off, I guess I'm curious, you've done a few of these interviews now, written, audio-based, TV-based. What's a question you wish you got asked more by people doing interviews?
Is this one of the rapid fire ones?
No. As an example, we had a photographer in here once doing an interview, and he spoke for 20 minutes about personal finance.
Right.
Like, that's his obsessive topic that he likes to get into. Is there anything like that?
If I had a subject matter that still fascinates me, it's what's happened over the last 100 years. And being an industrial designer, I see it so implicitly and so incredibly in detail. But the last 100 years has been absolutely pinnacle in the human race, right? So let's go back 100 years right now. You and I go back in time. We will be sitting probably in a shed with a dirt floor in 1921.
Yeah.
No televisions, none of this technology, no lights, no nothing. There would be no power, most likely, because the masses didn't have it back then. So we've come so far in 100 years. 100 years in the time human beings have been on the planet. And again, this goes back into all of this product and psychology of where we're all at the moment, and that's why I find it so fascinating. But so much has happened in my area, because that's what industrial designers did. We were born out of the industrial period in the 30s and 40s to build product and make product repeatable, and then all of a sudden people became very rich from it, because then they went, oh wow, I can make an FM radio and make millions of them. So what I find fascinating now is how condensed the last 100 years has been for the human being, and are we coping with all the variables from the last 100 years psychologically, which I don't think we are.
No, I don't
so, whether it's the computer you have or whether it's relationships or dating, it's become so complex, because now, 100 years ago, I'm not saying that, but I could have asked you on a date. I could ask that, that woman over there on a date. I can ask, it personally, and, awareness levels of all the things, being able to hop on a plane, understand all the aspects of the world now. I find all of that very fascinating. Where we're at right now, and is our mind and are our minds coping with all of those things? And it just opens up many things.
Yeah.
It just opens up opens up so many doors. As you know now, all of the things that have come out, obviously, which we all have opinions of, whether it's Black Lives Matters or whether it's LGBT or whatever it is, or
Or
there's
are
a
there
million and one
aliens?
thing now, right?
Or are there aliens?
Or are there
exist?
aliens? There you go. Yeah. So that I find that area very fascinating because that impacts on all sorts of areas of life and business, and because anything's possible now, isn't it?
Have you read Homo Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari?
No, I know of
I
it.
think you'd like it.
Okay.
It's a very, very good book, and it talks about that stuff in particular. And you're right, it's super fascinating. It's like how do humans deal with the fact that they've basically got in their phone all knowledge on Earth
Yeah. Right.
in this device.
Yep.
Like, that's crazy. And the little things like Netflix and what people do now when it comes to watching entertainment, they fall into sort of this period where they're just like stunned by the amount of choice that they have that they don't actually make a choice. I'm guilty of that.
Yeah.
Like, we can be
Flick,
sitting
flick,
there on
flick,
Netflix
flick,
and
right?
you're just going through everything, and it's like, oh, but maybe this would be better. So that affects entertainment. And then there's things like dating. Speak to friends who are dating, or people who are single who are dating, and you look at things like Tinder has actually and Hinge and all these other apps has in a way ruined dating, because all you do now, and it's ruined some relationships as well, because all you see now is the fact that the grass could be greener. It just
There's
continuously.
so much choice out there.
Yeah,
You're
so-
right. You're spot on.
So that is one of the biggest ones to me, is the abundance of everything has made a lot of people not so much complacent, but they're frozen
Yep.
in decision making.
Yeah, but the ultimate, and that you're leading into it, the ultimate that this takes us to is 100 years ago, you and I would be sitting there, whatever, we'd be having a beer, or probably not, or some homemade, moonshine or something, and there wasn't all the complexities and all the things. So there wasn't and don't get me wrong, it was present, but mental illness wasn't as prevalent as it is now.
Yeah.
So 100 years ago, people just got on with their lives, and it was, and I'm not being disrespectful, but a woman had her place, a man had his place, and the children had their place, and you lived and you had shelter and you got on with things. It was a simple life, right? But now, going back into what you were leading into, it's become so complex. Whether it's dating, whether it's choice, where do I go, what do I do, knowledge, it's pretty full on stuff.
Yeah.
So now there's new aspects of really heightened, complexities of, people and their stress and anxiety levels. I think you would know people's anxiety levels are through the roof now. Yeah. Their mental illness is through the roof. And I know that they're very aware of it. The government's very aware of it, and people are very aware of it. But when you look at that timeline over the 100 years, it started there. That's how it would have been. But now for 2021, it sits up here, whereas back then it would have been still here.
It's like a hockey puck.
So it's just opened up a gamut, and whether the human mind right now is able to deal with it, I don't think it is.
No, I don't think so. And it's a topic you could talk about for hours.
Sorry. So that's a good area. That was a really good question. So I had to think about it though.
So let's talk about rapid fire questions to finish things off. The first one I always ask everyone is, what does your morning and evening routine look like?
Morning is, it's pretty much work. Mm-hmm. I will get up. I get straight on to everything, and I see what's going on. So I'm one of those people. So, I wake up and I just get straight into work.
Yep.
And I compress everything into 2 or 3 hours, and I try and get everything done that I need to get done. Then I will go out and I enjoy my day.
Okay.
And I'll go and I take the dogs for a walk or go and do things, fitnessy things. So I compress my morning and get as much done when I'm awake and get straight into it first thing. And then my evenings, once I've finished that period, through the day, I tend to get back at some point early evening, and then I compress again for another few hours to get as much done for that day. So then I'm complete for that day. If we're talking work-wise, I try and compress, and then I will enjoy my evening. Then I close it off, and then I'll sit on whatever.
So at night, how do you sort
whatever.
of decompress? It sort of sounded like you just sit there and have the TV on in the background and just watch stuff.
Yeah, like my average evening would be, I cooking a great meal. Definitely love cooking, so I cook, 5-6 times a week. And it's a glass of wine or a couple of glasses of wine, and that's sort of my evening. So but again, I compress, as I said, and then I just allow to have, I guess, downtime after that, thereafter.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
If you were to pick a movie, doco, TV show, podcast, any form of media that you'd recommend to the audience that you've watched recently and enjoyed, what would it be and why?
I've never been I love my documentaries, but they're they're not. There's not something that would come to mind that I'm saying go and watch this documentary. Movies, there's a handful of great movies that I love, like anybody, but I've only recently started getting into things like some of the Marvel universe and even all of that. Yeah. I've actually been enjoying a little bit. Even recently, I watched that Ted Lasso, and God, that made me laugh.
Okay,
I don't know whether you've watched that. That's on Apple TV.
Apple TV, yeah.
But there's some good content out there these days. But I like everything. I love comedies. I love action. But if I ultimately had to watch anything in terms of series, it's always going to be a cooking series.
Okay.
I love watching Rick Stein and people
Rick
like
Stein's
that.
Odyssey.
I just love watching his different things, and I think things like that. Cooking shows do it for me. Not competitive ones, but more because they take you to parts of the world that that I've either been to, and you delve into the culture, and that's why I like those sorts of cooking shows, because then I'm immersing myself into that culture, whether I've been to Brazil or Russia or into China or whatever. It sort of takes you to those raw places.
Mm-hmm. Are you a Bourdain fan?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Bourdain.
Even him too, right?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Bourdain was the one for me.
Yeah. Same.
Last question for you: best purchase under $200.
That I was looking at that, and that was a good question. I actually have it here on me.
Okay.
And it's this thing here, which I've modified. But this
is
here,
that an Orbit key?
This is the Orbit key.
Yeah.
So if you guys have ever seen this, they're incredible. But what I've done, typical industrial designer, I've cut all the heads off the top of the keys. So I've even made it more lightweight. So this is my number one purchase. So there's about 7 or 8 keys in there, and that is my set of keys right there.
Wow.
No jingling, no mucking around.
So when you say you've cut the heads off,
the top,
you've literally cut them to
right
fit
down.
Yeah,
so it fits in there. So it's this beautiful little...
Because ordinarily, if you had it like this,
heads would be around
sticking out.
Around the outside, correct.
Wow.
So I've really trimmed it down to make it into like a super neat little, compact.
Do you know what's funny is we're actually talking to Orbit Key at the moment right now, which is so funny. Yeah. That is so
They've
funny.
done well. Good on them.
I know,
Very
it's
clever.
amazing. Melbourne business too.
Yeah.
That's cool. I really like that. I know that my wife Lauren and Julia, who's our strategist, has said like they want to just buy everything on Orbit Key.
Yeah.
There you go.
And this one's I think this one's top of the range. It's leather and it's, it's all very nice and it matches my shoes today.
Yeah, possibly. I'd probably go with, I've got like this cliche thing of everything leather I buy is like a brown leather.
Okay.
I don't know why, but it's just my colour.
No, that's good. You've got you've got to coordinate. It's
You've
all
got to
about
coordinate,
that.
yeah.
All about coordinating.
It's sort of like that with the R.M. Williams shoes, it's sort of that, I don't know what type of brown you call it, but it's sort of similar to that.
Chocolate. So
brown.
can I just one last one, which I think was a really good question that you added in there, which whether we have time or not. But the last question that I wanted to was it the personal one, the most intimate or something?
Just trying to think.
The 15-minute one of the 15-minute ones there.
So we've got, I don't think it's one of these, but there's what's in your fridge, food and drink of choice.
No, the next one down.
Important truth.
The important truth.
What insight about life seems obvious to you but not to others?
Yeah, I think that's a really important one to close off on. And I think it's probably the most important one because we haven't spoken entrepreneurial and we haven't spoken the business side of things. But I think the most important truth that people need to be aware of is having a partner that is acceptable, open, and understanding of the life of an entrepreneur lives and thinks. And to go to that next level as them as a supportive mechanism.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the biggest aspects of I think the entrepreneurial life is that you really need somebody that that understands that, because if you don't have that, you're constantly questioning yourself, which everybody does. You question all the things that you do. Obviously, everyone has confidence. You have varying levels of confidence, but having that supportive mechanism there is a really big area. So that's one of the truths that I would say that any budding entrepreneur coming, through the ranks is having a good support mechanism there.
Yeah.
And whether that's a partner or whether that's somebody that's so close to you that
friend or a co-founder.
Which is, co-founder, right?
Yeah.
Which I haven't had a co-founder since More. And you are right. There you go, a friend or a co-founder. And that co-founder, I was able to bounce my stress and all the things off, right?
Yeah.
Now I don't have that. So it's recognisably a lot different not having that person there, because now I carry all the weight.
Yeah.
And again, that partner, whether it's, personal or not personal, that partner that understands what you're going through constantly. Because it is hard, as you know, when you're a business owner or when you're an entrepreneur, whether I'm looking at half these people on the thing here, Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, those guys are so full on constantly that you need someone that is there when you do switch off, that supports you.
And brings you back down to earth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd 100% agree with that. I'm lucky enough to have that. So it's tough to find that, though. And you interview a lot of people and you can see that they struggle with a lot of that.
Yeah.
Because they've had relationships or people that they're with or people that they know. And oftentimes it comes down to the matching of personality traits, I find.
Yep.
Do you have someone who's not like you?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
That's
not
what
as
it's
intense
about.
as you.
Yeah. But a good one. I thought I'd finish off with that because I think it's pretty important.
Yeah, I reckon it's a great question, but a lot of people struggle with that question.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know why, but
and I don't think
sometimes
it
needs
gets
time to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think it gets talked enough in that entrepreneurial aspect as having that other person that's sitting there that, that's behind you. And you always hear the story after the fact that, they were there carrying you, which they usually do.
Yeah.
They're usually your support mechanism.
Yeah,
so as your case, you've got a great support mechanism in your wife, but again, she's your support, and that's pretty important.
Yeah.
Pretty important stuff as you go through life and you go through business, especially when you're doing things that other people might not be doing and pushing the boundaries and whatever. So,
you need that.
Yeah.
Deon, thanks so much for coming in. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
Over all of them, I'm sure of it. But no, look out for us. We're creeping our way into supermarkets. We just got our first foray into Woolworths Metro, so we're going through that trial period at the moment. So hopefully soon enough we'll be in all their stores across the country. So
Yeah. We'll link. So we'll obviously link Drumplings. It seems like you're most active on probably LinkedIn and Instagram.
Yes,
say?
for Drumplings. Yep.
Yep. We'll link all of that. But Deon, thanks for coming in.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for checking out this episode. If you do like it, please subscribe, and of course, like if you're watching the YouTube video as well. We'd really appreciate that. You can also find our Clips channel in the description. For audio, if you're not already listening, you can search Uncommon on Pocket Cast, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts quite easily. For video, if you're not watching, you can search Uncommon on YouTube. And for behind the scenes takes and clips on social media, then definitely check out @uncommon_show on Instagram. But otherwise, look, thanks so much for tuning in, and until next time, thanks for listening.